Okay. Well, welcome. I'm Ernest Moniz. I'm director of the MIT Energy Initiative here, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. As you've seen from the program, most of the program is going to be some pretty quick snapshots. People who normally talk for an hour, talking in 15 or 20 minutes, and give you an overview of a lot of the research. I'll start by giving you an overview of what we're trying to accomplish in research, but also a bit more broadly in the Energy Initiative. Given the short time, I'll just kind of try to emphasize a few key points. One is the Energy Initiative is the largest cross-campus initiative that MIT has ever done, and that's interesting. There's about 20% of the faculty, all the faculty, I don't mean the engineering faculty, I mean all the faculty who are directly involved in the Energy Initiative, not to mention many other faculty who are doing their own, kind of single investigator work. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students involved. The reason that's interesting is because I think that the students, especially the students, are voting with their feet. They do view this as a problem of overarching importance for this century. And so young people who do nanoscience, information technology, bioscience, traditional engineering and science, economics, political science, management, even some anthropology, are all really thinking that energy and the associated environmental problems are important. And so that's captured in what has become, as I said, really MIT's largest cross-campus initiative. Secondly, we chose, in contrast to most academic institutions, we chose from the beginning university-industry partnerships as the key pathway. The reason in a nutshell is, in the end, when you're dealing with a multi-trillion-dollar, highly capitalized, essentially commodity business, and you want to transform it on an unprecedentedly short time scale at terawatts of scale, industry has got to be out in front, and frankly, big industry has got to be able to capture the fruits of entrepreneurial endeavor to translate that into action, along, of course, with, shall we say, encouraging policy, et cetera. And third, a more recent focus for us, we've been in business now just over 3 years. A more recent focus for us is developing a new program in which we foster partnerships, research partnerships, educational partnerships, particularly with the large emerging economies in developing countries, because once again, that's where the solution lies to something like climate. Clearly, if we can't get the developing world involved in climate, there is no solution. So I guess what I want to emphasize is, A, again, students are voting with their feet on the importance of this problem, and B, our approach is to go where we believe the solutions are. I don't have time to spend on this, but this is one of these flow diagrams of primary energy going through, sometimes through electricity, but going to end uses. This, if we had time to study this, it would define many of the problems. Decarbonization, the need for energy efficiency, all that gray stuff is us heating the atmosphere, which, as far as I can tell, doesn't get much work done for us, et cetera. So anyway, again, we don't have time, but that's kind of part of the backdrop of this. I would emphasize another feature that we try to emphasize in our programs, that innovation is clearly key, but it's not only about technology innovation. Today, you're going to be hearing almost exclusively about technology innovation, although at the end you'll hear from Michael Greenstone, one of our economists, who just came back from being chief economist at the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House. He will talk a little bit about some more policy and economic study, but fundamentally, you're going to hear mostly today about technology innovation. One comment I would make is, again, we can discuss this later, technology innovation should never lose sight of the fact, in the energy business, it's about cost reduction. It's about getting certainly the marginal cost of low carbon low. Otherwise, the developing world won't play. Okay? But secondly, we need business model innovation. Again, we don't have time to discuss this in detail, but we have never seen so much entrepreneurial activity in the energy technology sector. VC funding, apart little blips with recessions, et cetera, but fundamentally VC funding enormous. But this is not the IT industry. You don't scale from small to terawatts in a garage. This ain't Google. And so that's why we believe that there is still a missing piece of business model innovation in which the entrepreneurial fruits are somehow captured by the large energy companies who have the supply chains, the customer bases, to accelerate transformation. If we had 50 years to wait, we could go, in some sense, the normal path. We've got to accelerate. And third, obviously, policy innovation. We need to have the market signals out there for business model innovation, for leveling the playing field as it applies to, let's say, a low-carbon world for the fruits of technology innovation to scale. And that, of course, leads to a bunch of technology pathways, which I won't dwell upon, except to say that the stars on here are my personal Michelin guide as to the kind of the priorities for getting impact, and it won't surprise you that efficiency, carbon-free electricity, and then buried down there in delivery system storage are, in some sense, the places where I would say we have the greatest opportunity in the near term, followed by other technologies. But this, I've gone through this kind of foreground because this is in many ways our reference frame for how we structure the initiative. Our new president at that time, May 2005, in her inaugural speech, Susan Hockfield made this statement, which was the words that launched 1,000 ships or something like that. And it was very interesting in a university environment to call this a responsibility and obligation for us to address these energy and environmental issues. And that really is the challenge, again, to which we have responded. Now, the scope of the initiative, we could discuss. You'll focus today, again, mainly on the research, and our focus in the initiative, by the way, MITEI Energy Initiative, let's get the pronunciation right, it's MITEI, okay? What we try to do is we particularly want to bring together groups of faculty across disciplines focused in a sustained way on key technology pathways, key policy pathways, key business model pathways. But we also are instituting novel educational programs. Hopefully we'll have time to discuss this. We are using the campus as a laboratory for students, especially undergraduate students, to do research and projects, particularly around energy efficiency. And finally, we have a charge of policy outreach, particularly to DC, although it does spill over to other countries. And again, I will at least touch upon these very, very briefly in the end of my remarks. As I said, our focus is on industry. It's been our lead program, and these are the set of current companies that are sponsoring major research programs. Of petroleum companies, BP, Eni, Chevron, Aramco, Schlumberger Oil Services, Total, but also Bosch and ABB and Siemens and Lockheed Martin and other companies. Again, later on, if there are questions, we can tell you a bit more about what they are doing. You might be surprised, actually. For example, Eni, the Italian oil company, their flagship program is $5 million a year of advanced solar research beyond silicon. The BP flagship program is around advanced conversion technologies for coal and biomass. In other words, the other large sources of carbon besides oil and gas. So in many ways, this is about these companies thinking about themselves as energy companies and looking for a resilient portfolio as we go into what is a fairly uncertain future in terms of how policy will evolve or how rapidly policy will evolve and how their businesses, especially the international oil companies with limited access to certain geographies, how they will expand their portfolios. But the members, there are some additional industry members there, associate members, but also these affiliate members are typically, mostly, for example, they are investors, venture capitalists. So I want to emphasize that when we talk about industry, we're not only talking about, multinational oil companies. This, in fact, is part of where I said earlier, the need to match the entrepreneurial cultures with the kind of energy incumbents. We believe that we must be a convening place across the entire innovation chain, from the venture capital to the big multinational, because we believe that's where a lot of the action will occur if we are to succeed in accelerating a low-carbon transformation. This is a set of the kinds of projects that we are focused on. Solar power is, if anything, our largest program. A good 50 faculty involved in various types of solar power research. You'll hear about some of it today, including the next two speakers at least, in fact. But also in transformations, biofuels, substantial, as you know, MIT is one of the world's powerhouses in terms of the life science research, and we are increasingly getting participation in energy relevant problems. Up in innovations, solids conversion is what I mentioned BP was doing, but it's also about things like advanced robotics for very deep water operations, for, say, natural gas production, advanced nuclear fuel cycles, carbon capture and sequestration. These are all very substantial programs that have grown the last years. We also have a major focus integrating science and policy for climate studies, large buildings program, I'll refer to that soon, and of course developing basic tools, be they scientific or social science tools for addressing energy transformation. I'm not going to go into this. This is a cartoon for a particular direct sun to solar fuels. You'll hear about that from Dan Nocera. This is another project around a novel solar thermal approach. What I wanted to emphasize rather was just this. You might ask why universities? And of course the obvious answer, which is a good one, is that this is where we train, of course, next generations, et cetera, et cetera. But it's more than that. If I take this issue generally, I'm picking one example, sunlight to fuels. These are the kinds of skills that one needs to bring this together into ultimately, hopefully, a technology. This is a dynamite technology if it succeeds economically. I mean, it's a holy grail, basically. Splitting water by sun, hydrogen, oxygen, storage is solved, everything is solved. Can we do it? Well, we'll see. But roughly speaking, this is what a university can bring to the table when it's focused on this problem. Because we have all of these assets, if you like, in different departments and bringing them together. And right now we have about 30 faculty coming together just around this discussion in terms of really hammering on this problem of sunlight to fuels. So we have the capability of bringing these big multidisciplinary teams to bear on this, and I believe that that is a major university advantage in looking at this. Another point I will make about the program is that we have a very vibrant seed fund program, funded mostly by our industry sponsors, also supplemented by our own funds and by philanthropy. I've just listed here, it isn't to read it, this in the next slide. These are 12 projects out of the 55 that we have funded in the last 2 years. What's interesting, and again, another very important feature of the university focus, is that you won't know this, but take my word for it. If you look through the awards, this is only the ones around bio-inspired seed grants. If you look through this, what we find is that about half of the faculty leading these projects never were engaged previously in energy-related research. Again, we're bringing in people from different areas, bringing new ideas and world-class capabilities to bear on energy problems because it's exciting And frankly, there's a big buzz when you have the kind of scale of program that we've generated. I think you have in your, oh no, you don't have in your packets. They don't have the Energy Futures magazine, Nancy?
I think it's on the stick.
Sorry?
I think it's on the memory.
On the memory stick. Okay, fine. Well, so I can't hold it up. The last version of our magazine on the cover, in fact, that magazine is organized around seed fund projects, and on the cover, Kathy Drennan, the second one down here, is an example of a new faculty member, world-class biochemist, bringing new approaches, in this case, enzymatic control of pollutants and greenhouse gases. U.S. DOE innovation. I'll maybe, truth in advertising, I was Undersecretary of Energy in the second Clinton term, and I say that as a confession because we did not do what I think has happened in the last year, which is very exciting. A whole bunch of new programs that are providing really new ways of the government getting into the energy technology innovation process. The Energy Frontier Research Centers, 46 of them were funded, an exemplary process, grand challenges in basic science. The next speaker, Marc Baldo, leads one of those. We lead 2 of them here at MIT. We partner in 4 others out of the 46 awards, and he will tell you about one particular example. But I think we are the only university to lead 2, and in addition participate in 4 others of these EFRCs. ARPA-E, new agency modeled after, loosely modeled, I would say, after DARPA. The idea here is now technologies that are 3 to 5 years away with some success, high risk, but 3 to 5 years away from potentially attracting significant amounts of private funding. Once again, I think we did here extremely well. We have one major award, the one that Steve Chu always talks about first, liquid metal battery. You'll hear about that later on today. But what I want to emphasize here is 4 recent spin-outs got awards. And a 6th award also went to an MIT graduate-run company who won our Clean Energy Prize on wind. My point here is to go back and emphasize, in my view, it's the university entrepreneurial culture that is at the forefront of innovation in this space. Again, I think universities are really driving it, not only MIT, universities, we are certainly part of that. Innovation hubs are a new initiative. This is Steve Chu kind of talking about it here at MIT almost a year ago. There are 3 out there. Proposals for the first are due on Monday. Nuclear modeling and simulation, sunlight to fuels, and energy efficient buildings. And I would just say again, we will be part of the proposals for the first 2 in partnership with the National Lab in each case. And frankly, we plan to lead a proposal on energy efficient building systems. This is all really exciting and really new innovation models. In addition to this kind of cutting-edge science and technology, there's a different kind of cutting-edge work looking at the rural issues. This is a student-led business model project in India, for example, figuring out how best to get into the solar lantern storage microfinance field. This is another student-led project in terms of solar thermal power, using not only for use in rural areas, but for manufacture in rural areas. Interesting systems design. This is now going into buildings. Another case of rural architecture. This won a World Building of the Year award. A brand new approach using a combination of low-tech local materials to high-tech software to construct novel and frankly beautiful buildings with 10% of the energy use that you would use in a customary building. So giving you a flavor that we're also, again, as I said earlier, focusing on developing some of these approaches. And then finally, a new thrust that we're just building up will be a major focus on bringing information technology much more strongly into the energy sector with intelligent infrastructure and systems design and device level innovation. This is just to emphasize, of course, all the work is done actually by graduate students. So this was our first kind of MITEI class of indentured servants who actually lead the way. And I want to emphasize, again, look at the diversity of this. This was 40 students, 13 women, 15 countries, and this really is obviously the future. Just to finish up, a word on education. As I said earlier, we are innovating in education. We've just introduced the first campus-wide energy minor degree program for undergraduates in energy. And besides the prerequisites, 3 core courses, a science course, won't surprise you, an engineering course, won't surprise you, but the third, designed by a team of 5 faculty from several departments, a social science foundations in energy, which we believe is essential, again, as part of the transformation. And finally, our 4th charge was on outreach. Here, among a number of other events, we have focused on integrative technology and policy studies carried out over a couple years by perhaps a dozen faculty from multiple departments and schools. Some of you may know the reports we have published on the future of nuclear power and the future of coal, both of which have found their way into congressional language, statute. And to give you maybe a heads up, if you're interested, this year, well, we expect within about 2 months to be publishing the future of the nuclear fuel cycle, summer to fall, future of natural gas, and future of solar energy. Next year, we expect to finish future of the grid. So again, these are studies that are rigorously analytically based, fact-based, but in the end, we make specific specific recommendations, technology and policy, to the government. We have a number of other outreach approaches, including timely policy relevant symposia, which off the record I call the Happy Talk Symposia, since there's a lot of happy talk politically on these subjects, and we try to get the facts out on the table. Last year we did that on the retrofit of coal plants for carbon reduction. This year we're doing it on electrification of transportation. We also had President Obama here. That was a nice outreach activity. So that's my kind of overview of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think now or later on, if you want to follow up, I think there's lots of stuff here, and of course we're pleased with your interest and would be happy to try to work with you to elaborate on these issues. Any brief questions, comments, or we'll just jump into the technology. Great, thank you. Marc? Yeah.
Right, hello everyone. My name's Marc Baldo. I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. And I should say right at the start, sometimes my accent trips me up a little bit. I've been here for 13 years, but my Australian accent has never really left me. So just ask me to repeat anything that gets muddled up in funny vowel sounds. Okay, so I'm here to talk about one of these EFRCs, an Energy Frontier Research Centre. As Ernie pointed out, there were 46 funded, and we're one of them. We combine 11 faculty here at MIT with 2 at Harvard and 2 more people at Brookhaven National Labs on Long Island in New York. And so I'd like to talk to you about, just briefly, I mean Ernie covered this, but I'll just repeat quickly. This program was actually conceived of in the last administration. It's intended to be the sort of focus of the US scientific effort. They're fundamental science centres on generally spread out across the energy problem. It was a long time coming. There are a lot of reports written and a lot of analysis from the US scientific community to decide what were the topics that we should look at. And then after at least 5 years of planning, the whole thing was executed last year. So we're one of the ones that was stimulus funded. We have $20 million total. That's spread out over 5 years, and we're including $1 million from MIT, to which I'm very thankful for Ernie for kicking in some of that. Our particular focus is fundamental science related to solar cells and solid state lighting. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to concentrate a little more on the applications because that's where we're heading, but I'm also going to try and highlight some of the fundamental issues that we're working on. And that's the recent presidential visit. Doesn't look like I'm a very good salesman. He doesn't look very impressed. Anyway, I'll see if I do a better job today. So the first application is solar cells, and fundamentally the reason we're interested in this is if you look at all the energy sources that can scale, solar is probably the best of all. If you compare where solar, what we get in sunlight compared to what we use, we've got a nice bit of headroom there. And so for no other point this makes, I'd like to emphasize the fact that if we do solar right, it could be very, very, very cheap because it should be very plentiful. And so, but if nothing else, there's certainly enough energy there for us to power everything actually with solar. The second application that we're looking at is lighting. And so if you look at, this is a breakdown from 2005 from the US Energy Information Agency on what we use our electricity for, and we're focusing on this piece. As Ernie pointed out, efficiency improvements are a key way to drive energy down in the near term, and so we've chosen this particular topic to work on. Now, it might not be obvious why we're combining solar cells and lighting together, but in fact that they're two parts of the same problem. That a light basically is a solar cell run backwards, and so there's a lot of commonality in the issues in both these topics. So hopefully I've justified the importance of these two applications. What's the exact problem we're working on? So the main issue is, I mean, already we have plenty of solar cells and we have lots of lighting technologies. The question is, how do we make them both efficient and cheap? Because usually, unfortunately, they're one or the other. To sort of summarize the science here, what's happening is that we rely almost entirely on solar cells and LEDs, light-emitting devices, that are made from crystalline materials. And these things are very highly ordered, and they take a lot of time and money to make. It's just hard to make things that are crystals. So for example, someone's pulling a crystal of silicon out of here, and you need to pull it out slowly, and you need to put a lot of energy into making the crystal. And there's really no way around that from a fundamental thermodynamic viewpoint. So one way to measure the impact of this is if you look at a silicon solar cell, for example, you've got to run the silicon solar cell for 2 years before you get the energy back that you put into making it. Now that's not necessarily a problem because the solar cell is going to last for 30 years. But nevertheless, it does present an opportunity, we would argue, for significant improvements. I'll give a contrasting number to this later on in the talk. So we want to make things cheap and efficient. And so what we're going to try and do is, instead of using crystalline materials, we're going to try and use disordered things, jumbles. Something that I could spray coat, print, make in a cheap, efficient, fast manner. And so what we're going to give up is order. There's just no way to make highly ordered structures very quickly and inexpensively. But the problem is that if you start using this kind of material, something that's a disordered material, then unfortunately the fundamental physics changes. So if we take like a jumble of molecules or some mixed up glass of quantum dots, then, and we sort of zoom in on that and we look at what happens on the sort of nanoscale in the light to electricity conversion process. If light comes in, instead of just forming charge like it would in a solar cell, a silicon solar cell. So in a silicon solar cell, light comes in and it's absorbed and out comes charge. No problem. Unfortunately here we've got an intermediate state. And it's called an exciton, basically. And it can be thought of just as a localized packet of energy right there on that molecule. And it can be treated for all intents and purposes as a particle. And so there's this intermediate species that comes in because of the disorder. And then you've got to break that up to get the charge out. So somewhere between photons and photonics and electrons and electronics is this third species that generally we haven't had to deal with much because we've not wanted to use these kinds of materials. So our center basically is like, okay, if we want to use these disordered materials, then we better understand the properties and be able to control excitons, these species that are a result of disorder in materials. And so that's our focus. And the other way to look at that is to say an exciton is just it's a nanoscale sort of, it's a packet of energy that's localized in a cubic nanometer. So it's a very, very small thing. And we're going to try and master it and be able to move it where we want and convert it to whatever we want. So our grand challenges are these. Number one, understand and control the movement of excitons, which you could read as, can we direct where energy goes on the nanoscale? Number two, can we control the life cycle? So can we change these into what we want? Can we break them into charge? Can we turn them back into photons? Can we control how energy is transduced on the nanoscale? And third, although this is a fundamental science center, of course many of us like me are engineers, and we'd like ultimately to build excitonic devices that have an impact. Right, so this is one of the only things I'm going to say about the fundamental science that we're doing. And that is a good example of this in action, and if you like, the proof of concept is plants and photosynthesis. So actually this is a bacteria. But if you look inside, and this is data done in an artistic way, these little things are individual molecules, and the structures are determined from X-ray crystallography. These are what is known as antennas from photosynthesis. This is the way this particular bacterium harnesses light. And you can see there's a very intricate arrangement here of these molecules arranged in so-called excitonic antennas. And this is the process by which basically photosynthesis harnesses excitons and can control where excitons go, and that's how it gets as efficient as it is. So outside of this structure there's a lot of disorder, but inside, in this sort of locally ordered area, the controlling excitons leads to the ultimate conversion between light and via electricity to fuels. So what we'd like to do is, a lot of the theorists in the center are actually very interested in photosynthesis by itself. They'd like to know, it turns out that in the process of going from photons into charge on these two out of this structure here, there's a lot of interesting quantum phenomena that we don't understand here that's used to efficiently move the energy from here to here. So this is just a matter of a few nanometers, but it happens in a matter of picoseconds. And we like to know exactly what are the quantum phenomena that go on here and how can we harness that. Because if we understand it here, then in principle we could apply it to solar cells. And the other thing I want to make from this point, from this slide, is I want to bring you back to the silicon energy payback time. Remember, the silicon solar cell paid back its energy in about 2 years. Now it's a little hard to figure out how long plants take to pay back the energy required to make them, but it looks like it's on the order of 2 days. So we're talking here about, remember, plants have to be able to grow, so they have to be returning energy on a similar timescale to the timescale that they're building their structures. But we're talking about orders and orders of magnitude differences. In this structure, the amount of energy required to make it is much, much less compared to what you can get out of it. And that points to really a revolutionary ability to be able to make much, much lower cost solar cells, and as I'll talk about in a minute, LEDs. All right, so I'll talk about some applications here. One of them is something that I'm especially interested in called a luminescent concentrator. And the idea here is to concentrate light on solar cells without tracking the sun. So we want to collect light for a small area of solar cells, so we spend less money on the solar cells, and we're going to use an excitonic material to do this. So it's a simple sort of construction. There's a lot of complications come in, of course, but the basic idea is simple, that you put your emissive dye, this is some little molecule or quantum dot that emits light, and you put it inside glass or plastic. When the sunlight comes in, it's absorbed and then re-emitted, but a lot of that's trapped, and you guide that to solar cells. So as long as this area is a lot bigger than the area of the solar cells, you can win economically here. So for example here, these things are actually lit up with UV light that you can't see, but it's being collected on the whole surface of this piece of glass, and you can see the light being focused on the edge. This one's capturing red light, yellow, green and blue. So that's the idea. You put the solar cells on the edge and have to use maybe a 1/10 or a 100th of the amount of solar cells you wanted to before. And so the future, what we'd like to do is we'd like to implement some kind of spray coating process to make these, or maybe something like float glass. So I'm talking about the sorts of manufacturing processes that make a lot of stuff cheaply. So these are the kinds of things that we've developed over time. Glass is a classic example of something that we make in vast quantities. Glasses, are usually about $1 to $4 a square meter, so roughly 100 times cheaper than a solar cell. And we make them because if we really want solar cells to take off, we have to cover huge areas with solar cells. And so just the sheer scale of the manufacturing required points towards having to master these kinds of materials that we can make lots of stuff cheaply with. Right, so the second part that I wanted to talk about was the reverse problem. So I talked a little bit about taking light in, turning it into charge. I gave an indication of some of the fundamental science problems that we're working on there and also an application. And now I want to talk a little bit on the reverse issue of turning electricity back into light. And so we like to use something known as a light-emitting device. And a good example of the sort of thing that we want to work on is a so-called organic light-emitting device. Now this is not organic because you can eat it, it's organic because it's made out of organic chemicals. So for example, the classic sort of breakthrough here was in the 1980s at Kodak, when a guy made two films of two different molecules. He put one film of this molecule down, which was known from photocopiers. It's on the drum of photocopiers and laser printers. And then he coated it with another material, which is this material conducts electrons well. And he injected charge into the thing. So he put in holes, so-called positive charges from this side, electrons from the other side, and in the middle formed an exciton, and that emitted light. And it was actually quite an efficient device, sort of 1% from charge to photons. And from that, there's been a lot of work in industry and in academia, both at startup companies like Universal Display Corporation in New Jersey and also big companies like GE, that have taken that basic idea and they've turned it into these big panels. So one of the characteristics of this form of lighting is it tends not to be very intense, but it's fairly cheap to make big areas and to make very good quality wide. And so if you look right now where we are compared to all the other technologies, so this is compared to a DOE target, and people quantify lights in lumens per watt. Lumens is a perceived measurement of light, how much our sort of perceived brightness by our eye. So if you look down here, this is the incandescence that we'd like to replace. They're down here at 20 lumens per watt. And the compact fluorescence that we're trying to move to now at about 50. Remember, the compact fluorescents have a lot of mercury in them. So the common perception in the field, I don't know how accurate it is that the department, that we'd very much like to ban compact fluorescents if we could, because of all the mercury in them. So as soon as we have a technology that's going to be efficiency and cost competitive with compact fluorescents, we'd like to move to that. So right now, compact fluorescents are at 50,000, at 50 lumens per watt. The best lab scale devices for the technology I'm talking about, the organic LEDs, are at 100 lumens per watt. And these live in the lab for about 8,000 hours compared to 10,000 for compact fluorescents. 10,000 hours is 1 year of continuous use. So we've got something that in principle is more efficient and more stable than a lot of the commercial technologies. And so in our center, we're looking at a lot of the fundamental problems here. How exactly does that exciton form? You've got charges coming in. When there's a positive charge on one molecule and an electron on another molecule, what happens when those two somehow jump together and form this excited state on a single molecule? What's the process there? How do we make that more efficient? And we've also got a bunch of work on just materials problems. So Sylvia Gradacek here in the Department of Material Science is working on nanowires as a very stable and potentially low-cost technology for LEDs. My colleague Vladimir Bulovic and Munji Bawendi in chemistry are working on different types of LEDs that have quantum dots in the middle of them for very nice quality whites that are also stable. And We're also got a bunch of work looking at the stability question more, which is basically, can we take examples like red car paint, which is a very, very stable material. It's very cheap. It's on the order of 1 cent per square meter in terms of material cost. If you have a red or a black car, probably you have this molecule in your paint already. So can we take these things that are manufactured in vast quantities, and basically build a lighting technology out of it? And there's a lot of examples of measurements of the stability of materials like this. This is not exactly the same, it's a laser dye, where people have demonstrated over 1 trillion excitons on a single molecule before it decays by 10%. So to 90% of the initial brightness with 1 trillion turnovers. So we can do it. Right now it works best in red. It's harder and harder in blue, and that's a lot of the scientific issues we're working on, is how to get the blue devices as stable as the red ones. Unfortunately, blue ones have higher energy excited states than the red ones, and so that's complicating the issue. But still, we think this is a very, very promising application. So I'd like to finish up there just by reminding you of basically what we're about and what our grand challenges are. And we're about 6 months into the program right now, and we'll be looking to sort of announce our first year results, I guess, over the next few months. So I'd be happy to talk to anyone who's interested. Okay, thanks very much. Are there any questions? All right.
I did have
Yep.
one question. There is a difference between an LED and an OLED, is that
Yeah,
correct?
right.
Where does the LED fall on that scale of
Yep.
lumens that you had
Yeah,
up?
that's a good point. So actually, I didn't do a good contrast between the two technologies. Basically, a conventional LED is made out of the materials I was criticizing. I was setting up a whole mission as opposing that way of doing things. So the LED is a crystalline material. They typically cost on the order of $100,000 a square meter. So they're very, very expensive to make. But you can get away with using a really, really small area because you can run them really hard. For this kind of technology, we're a lot cheaper, but then again, you can't get the kind of intensity that you would. So LEDs are looking like being point sources for lighting, whereas the kind of technology we're talking about here is much more of a sort of a diffuse light source. So we're interested to see how that's going to play out in architecture, actually. But basically, I think the conventional inorganic LEDs are up here somewhere. They're similar. I think the best one I've seen is about 120. Usually they're a step ahead of us. And there you can start to buy them now. But actually they have some stability issues too, because they're running them so hard to get the brightness out.
But they do not have the mercury issue.
No. But I think they're fundamentally very expensive, because they've got to basically make them at a nanometer a second. Just to make those crystalline structures is a very slow and time-consuming process, and there's really no way around it.
But the price per unit to replace a standard bulb or a floodlight is, I think the ones that I saw were somewhere 25 to $50 per unit.
Yeah. Now, as they scale up, that cost will come down, but fundamentally, it's always going to be an expensive technology, I think. Yep.
You're talking about the OLED as being a very diffuse light source. Is that the same OLED technology as in the screen of like this?
That's right.
Okay.
But that's,
so how come this is so sharp? And non-diffuse?
Yeah, so the point is that when you want to run a white light, you want it to be really bright. I mean, if you're trying to light up the whole room from something this big, then you've got to run that really hard. Whereas that display you can run at so-called 200 candelas a square meter, which is an order of 2 magnitude duller. So it's just really a matter of intensity. You can make these things into beautiful pixels and very sharp light sources, but if you want to get the total amount of power out to light a whole room up, you've just got to spread it out. So, some of the lighting designers I've talked to say, well, the problem with this is it doesn't have drama because it doesn't cast shadows very easily, but it's just a different way to do it. So we're interested to see how that's going to be, how that's going to turn out in applications. But GE has a very big program on this, for example, in the United States.
How close are you to that DOE target?
Well,
so
this
to be able
is,
to meet that in
yeah, this is the state of the art right now. 100 lumens per watt was broken last year by this company, Universal Display. And mostly between here and here, the challenge is how to get more light out of the the actual molecules are producing all the light, but it's some of it's getting trapped in the glass or in just the substrate material. And so how do you get that extra light out to the front where it's going to light up the room is the challenge. And how do you do that in an economically and a manufacturably compatible way? Yep.
Are there any health risks associated with some of these materials for production purposes, like quantum dots and the nanomaterials?
Well, it depends what they're made out of. So you can't easily group all the materials together. So people have talked about the toxicity of quantum dots, and some of them have materials like cadmium in them. I'm not really qualified to address that, but of course, you know, anytime you've got cadmium, people are concerned. With some of the organic molecules, again, it varies dramatically from what the molecule is. So these things should be in the solid state. It turns out to make them work, you have to package them up. One of the main challenges in this technology is the packaging, actually, because you've got to protect these materials much, much better than a conventional material. They're completely porous. So like a silicon device has basically glass on top, naturally, that protects anything from getting in. But for the molecules, they don't have that natural protective package that comes with them. So we've got to build it. In fact, what GE's been spending all its money on basically is how to do that on a flexible plastic substrate that can be guided roll to roll like a printing press. So what I'm saying really is that it also works vice versa. If there was a problem, it would certainly help the material stay in there. But I'm not aware. Most of the things that we work with in the lab, I mean, we don't need it, but I'm not aware that it's a big problem.
We should let you go so that you can teach.
Okay.
You said you needed to leave by 10 hours.
Yeah, actually that's true.
We can give email address for
Yes,
any
I'd be happy
follow-up
to
questions.
follow up. Thanks.
Actually, as Dennis is coming up, let me just note that this theme that I mentioned in energy technologies are cost. So you see cutting edge science, and cost was always kind of guiding where the science went.
Actually, this is not working, so they're just using the shotgun. So don't worry about this.
That's not working either.
No, that was this.
I just got to get this, but I don't want to. Good. Thanks. He gets really dressed up for teaching class, doesn't he? So here, I want to tell you what I think the MIT Energy Initiative is about. And it starts with the great horse manure crisis of the 1890s, when all these delegates gathered because you can see everybody was using horses. And the Times of London estimated by 1950 that every street in the city would be buried 9 feet deep in horse manure. And then one person in New York worried about horse manure reaching the 3rd story of every window in Manhattan. And it's because they couldn't see the car coming. And so you have the same sorts of things happening in energy now. Everybody extrapolates forward, and they only know a known technology. And when they extrapolate forward, they're going to be 9 feet or 3 stories deep in crap, okay? It did? How much?
Well, you know, listen to the news every night.
But guess what happens every so often? Shift happens. You like that? So that's what the MIT Energy Initiative is about. Shift happening. And so that's what you're you like that, Ernie? But really, that's what the Energy Initiative is about. When you look out and you look back and then extrapolate forward, you're in deep shift. And once shift happens, everything's going to be okay. And what I'm really interested in is solar energy, but really storage. So the thing that really matters, in my opinion, so this is my bias, since I'm talking to reporters, I'm getting them all out there right away. My bias is that you need storage. And the reason why photovoltaics isn't moving is if You know, it's the old line: if you can't store store energy, then no energy after 4, right? So if you can't store no energy after 4, so it really becomes an energy storage issue for me. How do I take the sun and store it at night so that you can have it? That's number one. Let me get all my biases out. Number two, the big driver in energy in the future is not the legacy world, it's all the poor people and the 3 billion missing people to come by the year 2050. So you're going to have 6 billion new energy users. They're the ones driving this big energy demand, and they're going to be the ones driving the big carbon output. So the second thing we decided to do is go after the poor, and then you get to exactly what Ernie was just saying to you. If you're going after the poor, there's not a lot of money, so you have to make it really cheaply, and it's going to be highly manufacturable. And that's exactly what you don't do in energy. Think about every energy system in the US or legacy world. You build one of them, and they're really big, and they're heavy, and then they cost a lot, and then you spend all your time trying to get the money back out of the people who have money. But that model will not work in the non-legacy world. The way it's going to work in the non-legacy world is you have to be the McDonald's hamburgers of energy, literally. You just got to be just churning out these energy systems really cheaply for people. So this whole idea of how we work, so that's one of the things, that's the manure part of the energy problem. Everybody is in the legacy world looking backwards and extrapolating forward, and you need a whole new model to give poor people energy. And I wanted to do storage. So you just heard about photosynthesis. I'm going to just tell you about a little discovery, but it's been driven by photosynthesis, because in the last 4 years there's been this revolution in biology where we finally got the Kodak moment of a leaf. We know what the inside of a leaf looks like, and we know how, because we know what it looks like, we can start guessing about how it works. So in Imperial College in England, halfway over the Atlantic from MIT, there was a professor a few years ago who figured out the crystal structure of a leaf. And once we saw that, that sort of energized our work to figure out how to do storage like leaves, because that's what leaves do. Leaves take sunlight and they shine it on water, and then you split water to oxygen and hydrogen, and that's where you store the energy. What most people don't realize, even scientists, by the way, is that the second part of photosynthesis is making sugars. That's what you all think about, sugar, carbohydrate. That stores no energy. That's just a hydrogen carrier. As a matter of fact, the water splitting reaction to give you oxygen plus hydrogen versus taking water plus CO2 to make sugar and oxygen, the energy difference is only 0.3% in terms of energy storage. So all the energy stored in water splitting, I don't have the slide in here, but it turns out that you need to solve the energy for the mid-century, you need to just split the MIT swimming pool, 1/3 of it to hydrogen and oxygen per second, and you'll store 16 terawatts, which will be the global energy need for the future. So if I can take sunlight, and then I have 1/3 the volume of the MIT pool all over the world, and I'm splitting it per second to hydrogen and oxygen, I'll be storing enough energy to take care by 2050, I can give you 16 terawatts. So I only need to deal with 1/3 the MIT pool globally. Per second, because I made it a power, okay? And that's an important issue. It's per second. Now you're going to say, wow, that's a lot of water, 1/3 a pool per second. But remember, when hydrogen and oxygen recombine, you get the water back, and then you release the solar energy in form of electricity. So it's a closed cycle. Of course, you're going to need more than 1/3 of a pool because you're distributed all over the world. But does that make you feel hopeful that I'm only dealing with 1/3 a pool? Oh boy. Okay, watch me. I'm going to do it for you. I'll show you. Doesn't it seem manageable? That's a message of hope. How do you like that? Shift happens. Okay, keep remembering that. Okay, so there's a company that started off of this, and I'm going to tell you about it. Not the company. I think I have this company here because I was talking to ARPA-E the other day, and they asked me to. So it's Sun Catalytics. But what we did is it's really the MIT discovery, and then, as usual at MIT, companies spin out really quickly. This discovery at MIT emulates photosynthesis. We figured out how to split water, just like a plant, and there's some amazing similarities. To get back to Ernie's point, you have to be cheap. You should realize, go on Google now, you can go buy a commercial electrolyzer that splits water, right? There are electrolyzers. So here's another good message, since you guys are reporters. Everything I'm about to tell you, we can do scientifically. That should make you, so I need to do 1/3 an MIT pool, and I can get on the web and buy photovoltaics, put them on your roof, take the electricity, go to a commercial electrolyzer, split water to hydrogen and oxygen, put it in a tank, feed it through a fuel cell. You never have to need anybody else's energy. So there is no showstopper. Science knows how to do every one of those steps. And if you wanted, the MIT Energy Initiative with the engineers and a few scientists, we could engineer a system for you immediately, and you could start using it next week. The problem is, it's expensive. That's a lie. It's not that expensive. It's just that your reference point is coal, and that coal is too cheap. Okay, so that's the real issue, is coal's too cheap. It's not solar's expensive, but that's the point of fact of the world. We have to go against the really cheap stuff, coal. Everybody always says price carbon and make it a real valued product, but that's besides the point. I have to be stuck with dealing with coal. So if I'm going to use an electrolyte, that system I just told you I could build for the average American, which is 31 kilowatt hours, that would cost you around $95,000 to $100,000. We're doing an MIT solar report, and I've already priced that out. So the problem is the electrolyzers are expensive, the PVs are still too expensive, and the fuel cell's too expensive. The electrolyzer is really expensive if you go on Google. So we thought if we could run it out of a glass of water, then it would be inexpensive, because then I don't have what's called high balance of systems cost, and I could do a lot of manufacturing. So the criterion we had at MIT is we're going to split water, but not the way you do on Google, which is under concentrated base and high balance of systems costs. We're just going to do it out of a glass of water. Oh, good, I didn't send the movie, yay. Okay, this is why Jason, I can't stand using other people. I mess up all the time. So I'm going to just tell you what we did. You take a glass of water, throw cobalt in it, or nickel. We now have another one. Earth-abundant metals. Throw phosphate in the solution. And I know somebody's worried about environmental stuff. Cobalt and phosphate's totally okay. Nickel, you carry around in your pocket. And so you put that in water, and then you put current on the electrode. The current would come from a wind mill or a photo cell, PV. When the electricity goes into the conductor, you form a thin film of stuff, that's over on the right, and then that thin film, as that thin film's forming, if I had remembered to send Jason the movie, this thing starts making lots of bubbles, and it's literally splitting water to hydrogen and oxygen on the desktop in a glass. That hadn't been done before. I'm just going to tell you how it works, because you heard in the last talk, scientists are always worried about stability, stability, stability. How long is it going to? We decided we weren't going to worry. We made ours really unstable. So this thing's a disaster. It's dying, but guess what? I am the giver of life, so I can repair it in real time. And that was a big thing that photosynthesis taught us. Do you realize the leaf is dying around every 30 minutes, but inside it's rebuilding itself? So what we did, here's the science discovery, we made the first self-healing catalyst, and we had to. So let me tell you why. First thing is, look at, it's a dice cube. You know that stuff I showed you on the electrode? Over there, it looks like a film of something. When you look at it molecularly, it's a dice cube, and it has cobalt and oxygen on it. That dice cube, by the way, is exactly the same thing that's in a plant. The plant has a dice cube in it, and that's the machine that's making oxygen, but it uses manganese instead of cobalt. So structurally, it looks like a plant. You have to take 4 electrons out. I'm not going to tell you all the chemistry to split water, but you need to take 4 holes. When you do, out pops the oxygen, and then you come all the way back down here, and it cycles over and over and over. The thing is, if I go and get the Google commercial electrolyzer, when you put the catalyst in water, what you're making is a lot of protons. And protons are acidic, so they attack the catalyst, and the catalyst corrodes. So this is why nobody ever tried doing this, because they knew if they did it, within seconds, the catalyst would corrode. But what we did, and our catalyst corrodes, it starts falling apart. That's what that arrow there means. So from the surface, the stuff starts falling apart, but we put in a step with this phosphate, and the cubes all form again. So what we do is we run it this way. It makes oxygen. Some of it corrodes, but then we do the self-healing step, and it keeps on going. So that's the science. That's what we had to figure out, is how to stop corrosion. And that's what we did a year and a half ago. What are the benefits of that? I can run it out of a glass of water. There's no catalyst. It just runs out of a glass of water except platinum, rhodium, and iridium, earth-abundant metals. Here's another neat thing. Because the thing's no catalyst, even platinum, rhodium, and iridium, if you put it, you need ultra-pure water. Now, if you're thinking about the poor, you're in Africa, and you're going to go give them a gallon of water, I'm going to show you even less, they're going to drink it. This stuff you can actually run out of, look at there's ultra pure water, black line. The blue line's the Charles River, okay? The green line is the Boston Harbor. It's a little bit, what you want to do is have this at the black line. So this is just minimal. This is a little drop in performance, but it's really stable. You can use human wastewater front and back. I'll tell you why that's important to me. Is really important, because now I'm not only talking about doing a storage mechanism cheaply in energy, I can also give people highly distributed pure drinking water from wastewater. So they can literally just go find a puddle on the ground, take it, and this catalyst starts working and splitting water under really simple and cheap conditions. I'm going to just show you one other quick thing. You have a photovoltaic and you send electricity through wires to an electrolyzer. A photovoltaic costs a lot because of packaging. You just heard Baldo talk about packaging. So what happens if I get rid of the packaging? I actually just take the semiconductor and then put it in a glass of water with the pieces that make the cubes, shine light on the semiconductor. Well, what happens is you can start splitting water. And I don't need a photovoltaic now. I have a magic powder, the semiconductor with my catalyst. That data over there is remarkable. Tungsten oxide is a typical photovoltaic. If you put it in water, you see the top thing, how that line is decaying? Once you put our catalyst on it, the semiconductor decays because these holes start ripping it apart. But now the hole goes right into the catalyst and it sits there, and then the catalyst rips the water apart. So the holes aren't around to ruin the semiconductor. So look at this, is after 8 hours, the tungsten oxide is perfectly stable. And then here's another cool thing. Tungsten oxide doesn't even make pure oxygen, it also makes peroxide. This stuff is 100% water to O2. So it works, all the energy is going into water splitting. So this means you can use it either in an indirect mode, photovoltaic, electricity through wire to electrolyzer, or put catalyst directly on the semiconducting material, just throw it in a glass, shine light on it, and split the water to hydrogen and oxygen. I'm not sure which one's going to be more technologically relevant. The catalyst we have now, all this is telling you is to store 31 kilowatt hours with a 6 by 5 meter squared PV array operating at 15%. I can take half of that current, and in 3.5 hours, I can split enough water to store for the average American home, which is 31.2 kilowatt hours. That's the amount of water I'm holding in my hand that I need to split per day to store enough energy for that house for an entire day. So that's what I was telling you. This is not a lot of water. For the poor, that's 31 kilowatt hours. You're running it around a kilowatt an hour. 24 kilowatt hours is a kilowatt an hour. You're just over that. Imagine giving the poor 1/10 the energy you use as an American. You know how much water I have to split? That drinking bottle back there. That was my demo. I forgot it. that drinking bottle right there, I have to do a day, and I can give the poor 1/10 the amount of energy. But it has to be highly manufacturable. This company, I put these guys up here because they're all my heroes. I can't organize a group walk of faculty around the block. So it was best that I just gave up most of the control of the company to these people because they know how to get business done. So that guy started the Ethernet over in the far right. He really did. Not like Al Gore did internet. He did it. He did what's called the LAN protocol, which is what you use for Ethernet. And he started the company 3Com. This guy is my superhero, Art. He made a little electrochemistry discovery, just like I'm telling you about in the early 60s. He figured out how to take chloride out of water and built the water company called Ionics, which is the largest water desalination company in the world. He retired at 71 after he sold it for a huge amount of money to GE. And at 75, he came out of retirement now to try one more time with energy, what he did with water to give poor people drinking water. There's my advisory board, a cast of characters. And this company's now totally committed to this. I will tell you, we're making prototypes, or they're making prototypes now, which are literally all plastic electrolyzers for around 56 bucks at 100 watts, which is our target. That isn't enough, because I still need a fuel cell that's cheap enough, right? And I can't use the Bloom box because it's a solid oxide fuel cell. It's too much heat. And I still want PV costs to come down, even though I will tell you some of the biggest PV companies now have come to us and we're about ready to go forward with some cheap commercial products. Yeah, right now we're at around 60 bucks. This is just for the water splitting at 100 watts. Which is going to be way cheaper than anything you see in the literature.
So 100 watts worth of...
Ernie, I'm actually early.
If you guys have questions, I'll get my card out. I'll send you guys slides, papers, and email addresses for follow-up questions.
But it takes me forever to answer email, so don't get mad at me.